Good evening. Today is Friday, July 12th, 2013. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I would like to welcome everybody watching to a live webcast on LaRouchePAC.com featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Leandra Bernstein is joining me in the studio tonight to be posing questions to Lynn. First, I would like to announce that coming up next week, the LaRouche PAC has decided to take a very significant political step and bring all 6 members of the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee into the Washington area for a very important escalation in our efforts in Washington, D.C. Now, Mr. LaRouche has requested that we begin tonight's proceedings with a question which has come in from the institutional layers, contacts inside the leading institutions of the United States, which want to pose the following question to him. The question is as follows. Mr. LaRouche, with the introduction yesterday of an additional Glass-Steagall bill into the United States Senate, there are now 2 Senate bills and 1 bill in the House of Representatives with 70 co-sponsors. All of these actions have been taken on a bipartisan basis. No matter how you view the individual members from both houses, the fact is that influential personalities have come out in support of the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. Where, in your judgment, does the fight for Glass-Steagall stand, and what is required for an effective policy to be actually implemented? Thank you.
We have to understand that unless certain things are done, that what will happen in the course of the election process will not be something to remember. It'll be something very dangerous. And we're going to have to induce a kind of cooperation that has not been considered for some time in the history of the United States Senate and House of Representatives. Because you've got, look at that, you've got a food crisis in the United States, that people are going to starve while farmers are being pushed out of marketing. The water crisis is immense. There's nothing you can say as a, shall we say, conservative to reduce expenditures. It won't work. You'll kill the American people. So the point is that if we have a bringing together of people who are candidates in this process, we can actually, with cooperation, we can do a number of things that will save the United States and help other parts of the world as well. But the first thing we have to do is to realize that we have an impossible situation, apparently, in the United States itself as well as in other countries. Europe, for example. Europe is on the verge of disintegrating, Western and Central Europe. That's part of it. And that is not going to do any good for the United States to have Europe disintegrate. We have crises in other places. We have a crisis coming up in China. China is about to plunge into a depression if Europe continues in the direction it's going in, and if the United States goes in the direction which it could go here. The collapse in large scale of the economy of China will be a destructive blow for the United States as in a greater degree for Europe. This says nothing about what South America's situation is and nothing about what Africa is and so forth. So we need to have not just a bula, a reorganization of the schemes of our government. We have to have a very serious cooperation, not where the president leads everything. We have too much president right now in the United States because he's not qualified to do all the things he's trying to do. And some of the things he's trying to do shouldn't work anyway. They're bad ideas. But if we really get the balance of our governmental system back into play and get rid of some of this shady business that's also going on from behind the scenes, we can put the United States back together again. We have to take into account the various points of crisis. We do not have enough food being produced for human beings to avoid a major crisis. Now, the kind of crisis we're talking about is not just a food shortage. It's both starvation and it's epidemic disease. So therefore, in the gathering together of the process of trying to put a Glass-Steagall bill together, we have that. We have also the fact that the whole monetary system, the international monetary system, typified by Wall Street and by the situation in Europe today, is hopeless. Well, it may be fun to watch all Wall Street go to hell, which they're going to do anyway, but it's not good for the United States to have them do that on our doorstep. So therefore, we've got to think about this kind of change, and obviously the Congress as a whole is the instrument which is most appropriate, because the Congress, when it's functioning as a whole body, or most people are functioning together as a body, Democrat and Republican and so forth, we can make the decisions, and there are emergency decisions that have to be made. We can make those decisions which will enable us to actually solve some of these problems. Look, Wall Street is finished. Wall Street, as you have known it, is finished. It cannot exist. It is hopelessly bankrupt. There's nothing in it but fake values to speak of. So Wall Street is nothing. It's not an asset. It's a criminalized kind of place, which is not a good place to be. But we have to pull back the organization of the money system, the banking system, which Glass-Steagall is crucial for. But we also have to get back some food growing back in the western states, where they didn't have any the water available to build up the agricultural product in this area. So what we need is a consensual approach on limited number of issues. You don't have a lot of clutter, which is unnecessary. But on certain crucial issues, the United States, through the cooperation in the Congress, must conduct what will amount to a major sweep of changes in the way the U.S. government is organized. And I believe that enough people in the Congress who would be individually willing to put their shoulders to the wheel on this one. And there are other problems which need to be dealt with more emphasis on the Congress. The American people now have no confidence in the presidential system. They have only the fear of the presidential system, not the cooperation. They don't anticipate cooperation. So we've got to realize that Wall Street is going to collapse. But the only way it would continue is if they put a Hitler-style dictatorship over the United States and Europe at the same time. Otherwise, you cannot hold together this system, the system of Wall Street and so forth. In Europe either. You cannot. You're dealing with a killer system now, and the problem is coming largely from our rival, shall we say, the British monarchy. The British monarchy is now operating on a basis very serious, and they're exerting great influence on our own country. What are they doing? The Queen is committed. The Queen of England is committed to going to a reduction of the human population of the planet from 7 billion people to less than 1. And this is already in process. And much of what we're getting, especially in the Wall Street crowd, reflects this anticipation. So therefore, we have to stop that. Because if you do that, you're going to turn this planet into a hellhole. And you're going to kill a lot of Americans real fast. Because they're not going to have food to eat. The American people as a whole do not have enough food to keep them alive under the present trend. That has to be changed. We don't have the farms functioning that we had. We don't have the cattle we used to have. California, which was the greatest food production area in the United States, has virtually collapsed. The cows are being killed, the foods are being cut, these kinds of problems, and therefore we need a very strong consensual factor which should be assembled around a core in the Senate and House of Representatives to shift the control of the situation away from the presidency, which is over-controlling. It's controlling too much, far too much for anybody's good. And therefore we've got to get the people of the Congress together as much as possible to deal on a bipartisan basis with these measures which must be taken. So if we anticipate that we're going to do that in the Congress, and otherwise, then it can succeed. And what we need is the assurance now that more and more members of the Congress are prepared to shoulder this role of leadership of the United States. We need a leadership of the United States coming in terms of the structure of the Congress. We've had too much presidency, especially since George W. Bush became president. The United States has essentially, relative to what was there before, the United States has gone to hell since that time. And since the changes away from Glass-Steagall have resulted in a cumulative destruction of the ability of the United States to function as a nation, a democratic nation anymore. Fascist nation you can get. A democratic one under the present trend you can't have. And the British Queen does not desire to have any more Americans. She wants it reduced down to less than 1 billion out of the 7 billion people living on this planet. And we've got to stop that. And therefore, if we can get an agreement among leading members in the Congress to do this kind of job, to get together and to avoid nonsense differences, we can save the nation. And I think that's the mission right now. So I think it's not a matter of just dealing with the obvious thing the question deals with, but it's necessary to have a more coherent, positive, assertive leadership from the leadership, or the natural leadership, shall we call it, of the Congress itself.
All right. Now we have a number of questions for you tonight, so I will try to keep things as brief as possible. Now, on numerous occasions you've said that after we put Glass-Steagall through, there's going to be a significantly decreased amount of money in the system. Now, the question comes up very often, especially on the issue of Glass-Steagall, where many people who are ostensibly for it are for Glass-Steagall but not ready to give up Wall Street. They say, "Oh, but can't we just keep Wall Street?" And you get this a lot. Now, if it's the case that there's not going to be enough money in the private sector to conduct the kinds of lending that people have come to expect, even if they don't get it, they come to expect it from Wall Street, where then will the money come from? For example, you have numerous conferences, recently a high-speed rail conference, and the people who want to make these projects happen, they want to know, where do we find the investors? Who's going to buy our stock? Who's going to buy bonds? So that we can get this high-speed rail line from X to Y. So I'd like you to address the question that often comes up: do we need Wall Street? And what do we do with people who want to hold on to Wall Street for just a little bit longer?
Well, first of all, there's no possible way that you can save Wall Street in its present form. No possibility. Most of the people who are already investing now in Wall Street and confident on it are going to find that on one big early day, there is no more Wall Street. See, the problem here is people don't think carefully enough about what's going on in the world today. What is the world of the world today? And they don't know what's happening. They're not listening to what the British monarchy is doing. Now, the British monarchy is not just a British monarchy. The British monarchy is an empire. If you look at the number of nations which are overtly part of the British Empire, then you begin to see the truth. The empire's destiny is to eliminate people, to reduce the population from 7 billion people approximately now, still and falling rapidly, to less than 1. And that is the British policy. That is the Anglo-Dutch policy. That is the policy of the current Euro system and some other places as well. Add to that the collapse of China, the China economy, because the market for Chinese goods, including automobiles, was shifted from the United States and so forth into where? It's gone. So the system is impossible. And all is holding it together is the tendency of people out of fear to believe in what's not true. There is no hope for a person surviving in general in the United States on the basis of Wall Street-backed investments. It's not possible. If you've got a Wall Street investment, you should start crying now while you still have tears. But then the problem is, what are we going to do about the people who are now going to be working for Wall Street? Hopefully, they're going to be working instead of working for Wall Street. There's a difference. And that means we've got to actually change the whole direction of the budgetary policies of the United States as an overall institution. We're going to have to create jobs, yes. We're going to have to put these people who are Wall Street migrants or whatever into work. We've got to do that. We've got to give them other jobs. We've got to get industry growing again. So instead of doing what this current president is doing under the direction of his master, the Queen of England, we've got to get rid of that. That's why the Congress must do it. You can't let this president do it. You've got to keep him under the restraints of the legitimate authority of the Congress to shape the legislation which is going to govern this. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos and mass death. But the problem is we have a shortage of a lot of things. But we can, if we have the will, and if the Congress does the job it can do, we can fix this. We can take the people who are now living on Wall Street incomes, they'll do something else. We also, obviously, the United States is going to have to change its policy in the sense of increasing the amount of credit available through the system. Now that means putting Glass-Steagall through means that you're going to actually foreclose a lot of garbage, because all the garbage, including the Wall Street garbage, will then, if Glass-Steagall is actually put through, much of that garbage will disappear from the accounts. Now, this means that we're going to have to change the system suddenly, and most people, I think even in the Congress, do not really understand how to organize the system under these conditions. We put Glass-Steagall into effect. Now, Glass-Steagall, if we put that into reorganization, we're going to cancel a lot of the banking operations now because they're bankrupt, because they're Wall Street connected. So therefore, we're going to have to actually take the good part of the system, boost it up, get the organization of the system working, and then we're going to have to create credit, because there will not be enough credit in the system to sustain the economy. So therefore, what we're going to have to do is create a credit system account, which will be run through the banking system, the new banking system, after the reorganization. And we're going to have to put up federal guarantees for the existence of credit dispersed in order to create the increase in productivity of jobs per capita and quality of jobs in general. So we're going to have to go through a process which in many respects is an echo of what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did when he put most of the criminals in Wall Street into jail. And that's the way we have to do it. We've got to take the responsibility. These are human beings. These people out there, our people, they're human beings. And the way they're being treated now by the present administration and the previous administration, the previous Bush administration of two terms, have done a wrecking job on the U.S. economy which is beyond belief if you think about it. So therefore, we, through the U.S. government, in the way that Franklin Roosevelt approached this problem in his own time, we've got to take the responsibility to get the job increase to grow, to make the food more produced, all these kinds of things. And I think the optimism which we have the potential to create among our own people in the United States, if they are convinced that the disaster they're living through can be relieved in at least as rapid a way as Franklin Roosevelt dealt with the crisis back in 1932-33, when 33 did it. That we can say we can do. It's going to take a lot of devotion, a lot of intelligence, and so forth. And if we can get the members of the Congress, or a great majority of the members of the Congress, in both parties, and all divisions, to recognize this, we in the United States have the power, as citizens of the United States, especially those who are in office, to do the kinds of things which are needed to restore this nation to recovery, and to lead also in creating new conditions of life for people in Europe who are now going through hell. Get them out of hell. That's what we have to do, and we can do it. It's not going to be pretty, because we've gone so far deep down in this thing that there are not great opportunities in terms of incomes available. But, as Franklin Roosevelt showed in the 1930s, if we start the process, we can stop the blood flooding, and we can begin to build our way back to a full recovery. And that kind of recovery orientation, not only for us in the United States, but in our concern for Europe and other parts of the world, have to be expressed that way.
All right. Now I have a follow-up question, which is a little bit belated. It's a follow-up to last week's webcast and what you discussed there in terms of a real significant pedagogy of how our American system works when it's not functioning as an oligarchical system. And you raised the issue of employment, of food production, and just based on the current statistics, we are at a point where 40%, almost half of the existing jobs in the United States are low-wage jobs. We have lots of temporary work. We have the work in the public sector is being slashed, while service industry jobs are being created. So we're losing teachers, we're losing state workers, people who had pensions, who had retirement, who had health care, and they're being replaced with temp workers, with part-time workers, and the like. And at the same time, we've published extensively the components of the food crisis in the United States, our lack of ability to even export food, where a decade ago we were exporting significantly more food to nations in need than we are right now. But last week you cited the works of Alexander Hamilton and his reports to the Congress, and one of the most significant of those reports is a report on manufacturing. And last week you posed a sort of rhetorical question of how you take the total effort of mankind to maintain and increase the production of life, of human life. You described a dynamic system in which everybody contributes to everybody's profession and expands the available professions. Now, in going back through Alexander Hamilton's report on manufactures, he outlines each of these elements very, very specifically, and I'd just like to throw them out as a description. He says you want to establish a division of labor so that each one of your workers can aim at a single task, so that you're not doing everything. You're not farming, trying to make your equipment, trying to make your shoes, etc. You can have a single focus. Then you employ machinery The employment of machinery allows for more skillful work. You can do the same action, but it's much more powerful through the employment of machinery. Then you have more occupations that are available. Now you have year-round work. You have work that people who were in your population, who were unemployed, could not do, but now they are able to do. Then you have to take into account the effects of infrastructure, how water, access to water, power, transportation for people and goods impacts your overall economy. Then you look at the greater scope for a diversity of talents. Since you have a working population that is directed in each of these areas, they have more opportunity. They are able to find their talents in these pursuits versus being employed in menial labor, not using their mind, not developing their potential skills. And then you have the development of new resources. You can, thanks to these interactions, you have the potential to develop these new resources. And what's most important, though, is that this is occurring within a national economy. And one element that Hamilton points to is that when you promote domestic manufacturing, it in turn promotes domestic agriculture, because you are creating, through the domestic manufacturing, a steady demand. So whereas when we were a colonial exporter, it was just when our colonial masters would say, "Hey, give me some cotton. Hey, give me some produce," that our workers would be employed. Domestically, you have that constant demand. So these were elements that Alexander Hamilton laid out in his report on manufacturing of a dynamic national economy. And I would just like to make the side note that this report was republished by an act of Congress in 1824. The Congress said this report needs to be republished. And it was republished under a different name. It was republished under the name The Wealth of Nations. So the Congress took actually the exact title of the Adam Smith piece of work and assigned it to Alexander Hamilton's report on manufactures. So since you laid out the outline for this system last week, I'd like you to further elaborate the system for our purposes.
The obvious thing we're going to have to do, if the Congress, the new Congress, newly assembled Congress, is able to do that, we're going to have to use the fact that we have a knowledge of the history of the economy of the United States. And there were certain things that were great achievements at one time or another, and sometimes more recently, actually. We've had a great downturn in the United States economy since somebody killed our president. And therefore, we have been in an actual decline since we went into the war in Indochina, which the president was against, and which our greatest war hero was against. So we've been foolish. And John F. Kennedy, his killing, was the real point when a downslide in the entire U.S. economy began to occur under the impact of a needless, stupid war in Indochina, which took about 10 years of the lives of many of our people and turned them either to kill them or turned them into virtual vegetables on drug addiction. Since that time, the United States economy has been declining first in the industrial sector during the 1970s. There was the crash in 1971, and that was a great crash, which I had a hand in diagnosing then. So the comeuppance is what? Well, we have the state of California, which was the greatest food producing area in the world, of any part of any nation. We had Tennessee, which used to be wealthy under that program there. We had what was in Pennsylvania, which used to be a great industrial state with many other features, agriculture and so forth. What about Detroit? What about Michigan and the area around that? I saw, and I was there, and fought to prevent the shutting down and the transfer of automobile production to China and elsewhere. We had a lot of people that were working and supporting me, but then they came under pressure and they gave in. Now what we have is we put the automobile industry into China, took it out of the United States, put it into China. Now what's going to happen? If the United States economy collapses, as it is tending to collapse, and as Europe is collapsing, then China is going to lose its market for the part produced, which used to be produced by the United States. So if we just take lists of these things, take Texas. Texas is almost dead in terms of food growing. The cattle are gone. The cornfields are gone. Everything that was essential to us is largely gone. So therefore, the obvious thing we have to do, with some other ingenious thing stuck into it, we're going to have to say the policy of the United States henceforth, from this year, is going to have to be rebuilding in areas where the kinds of skills and traditions which we used to have can be resuscitated in order to make a composite out of these elements which will restore the United States to being again the United States. And we have to think of our cooperation with other nations in other parts of the world in the same terms. We have to look on the basis of what we have, skills which are dying. We have older people in their 60s and 70s. But in the machine tool design area, those people are powerful. But they're not being used. They're not being employed. So therefore, what we have to do is first fix, repair what was broken. Just by looking at what was great in our nation in terms of economic power and social processes, put it back. It'll be slow, but we got to start somewhere. We've got to rebuild California. It can be done. We know where it is. We've got to, California, we've got to rebuild the water system, the sources of water. We've got to have the WAPA project, which will be more than was intended back in the 1960s. This time we're going to have to go with higher technology. And that will enable us to get the water system, which we can know how to increment. We know how to do it. And if it's done, we've got a solution to California and some other places. And we have things that we can do now which we never were capable of doing at any time in the past, even in our best time. So therefore, we take these components which are there, what was taken down, which should never have been taken down, rebuild it. Rebuild it where the skills exist and where the means of production exist. And the people themselves, because the area in which they lived or which they worked, even if they're in their 60s and 70s, they will remember where they worked and what they did and what they could do. And that's the way we're going to rebuild. Think that perspective. Be really practical. Where people exist who know how to do something, keep them occupied there and give them every opportunity where you can. That's the way to rebuild.
Now, I want to address something that you brought up earlier in the broadcast tonight, what you referred to as the fear of the presidential system among the American people, especially after 13 or 14 years of a George W. Bush, Obama administration. And over the recent weeks, many of these fears that many Americans had of what crimes their president was committing against them were vindicated because of the revelations by Edward Snowden, Glenn Greenwald, and others having to do with the NSA spying. Now, just today, the most recent development in this Snowden story is that Edward Snowden, who's basically been in limbo for the last 19 days in the transit area of the Moscow International Airport because Obama revoked his passport, his citizenship, and has turned him into a stateless person, and has been engaged in massive intimidation of nations, including bringing down a head of state's jet because of suspicions that he was harboring Edward Snowden on board, and so forth. Snowden held a press conference with a number of members of international human rights organizations. Now, one item in this press conference was an opening statement that Snowden made. And in this statement, he began by saying, look, a little bit over a month ago, I lived in a state of great comfort. I had a house, I had a family, I had a high-paying job, but I had a high-paying job spying on the American people. And I believe that that was wrong. It was a serious violation of the law. Not only a violation of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution of my country, but also a violation of international law. Now, very interestingly, the next reference that Snowden made was to the Nuremberg Tribunal of 1945. He cited the principle declared in Nuremberg, which read, individuals have international duties which transcend the national obligations of obedience. Therefore, individual citizens have the duty to violate domestic laws to prevent crimes against peace and crimes against humanity from occurring. And he said that the moral decision to tell the public about the spying by the Obama administration has been costly to my personal liberty, but it was right, and I have no regrets. And then he details the persecution that the U.S. government has conducted against him personally since that time. And he ended by saying, the willingness by powerful states, such as Barack Obama's United States, to act extra-legally represents a threat to all of us and must not be allowed to succeed. So my question is, what role do you see this Snowden affair, as it's being called, and Obama's own clinically insane Nero behavior in response to this? What role do you see this in playing in Obama's own ultimate Nixonian downfall, especially in the light of Snowden's highly appropriate reference to the Nuremberg Code of 1945?
Yes, this is a mess, isn't it? Okay. Now, what is the mess? Well, the mess is essentially, go back to the time that the wall came down in Germany. And the prime minister, the so-called of Germany at that time, moved to reunify Germany and to proceed to rebuild the country. Well, you had three clowns in particular who prevented that. One was the mistress of Britain at the time. Another one was the King of France, so-called, the Social Democratic King of France, and some other people involved, and George W. Bush, H.W. Bush. And they decreed the creation, in effect, of a new system in Europe, which was actually a process, the Euro system, which is a process of taking away the sovereignty of all of the nations of Western and Central Europe. And that has gone on. So the nations of that region no longer have any real sovereignty. The elements of sovereignty have been taken over, and a bunch of jerks of the worst kind have taken the key positions which rule the European system, European Union system. So you've got at a point The problem is that this is essentially a result of the British Empire and its accomplices. So therefore, if you're going to save civilization, you're going to have to break up the British Empire in that form. France is France. They got enough problems in France without having the British there too. Spain, Portugal, Italy, one nation after the other is being destroyed. They're going to die. Why are they going to die? Because the British monarchy, under the Queen, which is actually a world empire. It's not an empire in every part of the world, but it's an empire in most of the important parts of the world. We're going to have to break up that empire. Now, the empire has a policy, the Queen of England. And the policy is clear. Genocide. Her policy is to reduce the population of the planet from a present estimated possibility of 7 billion persons to less than 1. That's her policy. And the policy is the British Empire is an empire. If you go through the number of nations which are actually under the reign of the British Empire is an empire. As big as ever before, as big as any empire was before. Well, therefore, we in the United States, who are patriots, have a certain argument about this matter. We don't think it was right to take the force of a gun, partly assisted by H.W. Bush, who's a nasty fellow. He's not as fast as he used to be, moving around. But he's an evil man. And I know him. I know him on record as an evil person. And his son, who was president, was an evil person. And if you look at the record since the grandfather was the guy who put Hitler into position in Germany. Not a good guy. So I think we got to get out of the bushes for once and come back to civilization in several ways. So we have to clean up the Bush problem, our own problem. What he's done has been evil. 9/11. He committed a crime. He knew and covered up the fact of who had actually done it, the crime of 9/11. It was done by the British Empire in concert with Saudi Arabia. That's who did it. But now you have the program under the Bush family reign. We say, get out of the bushes. America, get out of the bushes. Because what happened is everything bad has happened. Everything really bad that destroyed the United States as a system happened under the Bushes. And you had to know, H.W. Bush was also a failure as a president for one term. He was also a vice president, and he's very good at vice. He also was a swindler in another case. His father was as I said, was one of the big backers of Adolf Hitler and the Hitler machine. And what happened there? I think we could improve our quality of some of our leading citizens a little bit that way. So that's what we are. We have to understand that we have a system which, under the influence of chiefly the British Empire, and the Bushes are nothing but slaves for the British Empire in terms of emotions. Their whole character. They are British agents. Like that whole Wall Street crowd. British agents. So we got to break that up too. We don't want to destroy the sovereignty of any nation in Europe. Rather, we would like to have them restored to sovereignty. They'd be much better. They'd be productive. They'd control their own country. Spain doesn't control its own country. Portugal doesn't control its own country. Italy doesn't control its own country. And Germany really doesn't control its own country, though it tries to, in a very weak way. So the time is, our interest as in the United States, our interest is sovereign nation states and good sovereign nation states. We want the system of cultural sovereign states restored to end this whole kind of an imperialist effort. What this is a new Roman Empire is what we're living under. And because with Obama as president and George W. Bush as president before him, we've lost our sovereignty because the sovereignty was given to our enemies, our Bush League enemies included. Therefore, what we have to do now if we want to save the United States, if we want to save anything in the United States, we have to return to sovereignty, get out of the Bushes and go back to sovereignty. And we also have to help free nations in Europe and elsewhere, free them where they had lost their sovereignty. We have to rebuild the economy of the world, which we can do. It's in our spirit. It may not be in our capability right now, but it's in our spirit. We've got to do that. And we have to, and I stand here on this, we have to, as I know I have to. It's my obligation, but also the obligation of many others, to spark the initiative which leads to the reconstruction of our sovereignty in our society, in our system. And to understand that we cannot defend our own sovereignty unless we have respect for those of other nations. So we have to rebuild the world on the basis of cooperation among respectively sovereign nation states, which is our natural interest. It's our natural habitat, in fact, or at least intellectually habitat. And that's what we have to do. And the time has come. If we don't do that now, when we still have the last opportunity to do that now, then we're not going to have a United States. So if you're a patriot of the United States, you are going to willingly, actually enthusiastically, do as I have suggested here.
All right. Now, I'd like to go back to a forecast that you made 2 weeks ago on the weekly report, Wednesday weekly report, and this forecast is perfectly in line with something that you've been emphasizing this week, that we do have 2 weeks, and it's less than that now, until the Congress leaves, presumably for their summer recess. That's a very limited time to be able to be working with the Congress. But on that weekly report, you issued the forecast that if the policies of the United States continue in the way that they are going without any change, you will have a disintegration of the economy. You could have something like fascism or worse. Now, it was interesting that earlier this week there was a bail-in proposal that went through the European Parliament. The European Parliament voted in favor of a bail-in provision to resolve these G-SIFI enormous mega banks. Now, a few days after that happened, Jorg Asmussen of the European Central Bank said that a bail-in mechanism, which would go into effect as the ECB's would as late as January 1st, 2019, was much, much too late. The European Parliament proposes a bail-in to enter into force in 2016. He says that's an improvement. But I think January 2015 would be better. Markets will, in any case, anticipate bail-in earlier. Now, this is also in the environment. Ben Bernanke made some utterances earlier this week, basically repeating his hyperinflationary policy of the endless quantitative easing, Q eternity, as some of us call it. And at the same time he was giving this speech saying quantitative easing would continue, the FOMC meeting of mid-June, the meeting minutes were released showing a division, about half and half of the Fed governors saying go ahead with the quantitative easing hyperinflation, and then half saying just cut it off. And we've reported on this the annual report from the Bank for International Settlements, which was encouraging the Federal Reserve to just straight cut off quantitative easing, to let the system go. Now, with what was said from Asmussen of the ECB, we need bail-in sooner, and then the fact that there are ongoing hearings in the Congress debating Dodd-Frank, which establishes a bail-in provision in the United States. It was Mario Draghi in 2009 who said every nation, sorry, not 2009, 2010, who said every nation needs a Dodd-Frank. Every nation needs this ability to resolve conduct these cross-border resolutions. So that being the case, and with what you said earlier this evening about that Wall Street could not exist in its present form, cannot exist, but that we could go for something like fascism. And given what we're seeing coming out of the Obama administration, I'd like you to address the seriousness of this and also what we do about it.
Well, first of all, there is no possibility that with the way things are going under the British monarchy and what it represents. Remember, the British monarchy is a world empire. It is an actual world empire. There are some niches in the whole picture which are not British as such. But the world is now dominated by the British Empire. And the policy of the British monarchy, which controls this empire, is the reduction of the human population from its recently established 7 billion persons to less than 1. In other words, you have a monster out there which bases its policy on genocide in the order of reduction from 7 billion people to 1 billion people or less. Right? That's the reality. Now, if you're going to put up with that, if you're going to condone that, you are a pig. And you know what happens to pigs? What their destiny is. So therefore, that's the starting point you have to proceed from. This, if Glass-Steagall is put through, and is put through honestly, Wall Street will disintegrate. And that will be a very, very good thing. Because instead, we'll let the guys who've been stealing and swindling go in the barrel for a change, and let the normal human beings have a chance to really work for their living and have some decent kind of life. What we're doing to our children. You know what's happening to our education system? What now is happening to the education system? They're coming in with short-term teachers, throwing the qualified teachers out in secondary schools, throwing the qualified out, and giving them no education to speak of, no real education at all. Now, if you look at what the temperament is coming into our children are being turned into gangsters, or worse than gangsters. And it's being done to them. And therefore, those areas where we have like secondary schools in which we have some excellent teachers, they may be 50s or 60s in their age, but they're people who can teach children and adolescents. And they can do a very good job at it, the best you can get for money anywhere you go. They're throwing them out of the schools and bringing in jerks who have no idea what education is and giving the children a short shrift. In other words, we're making our children stupid and worse than stupid. So therefore, the time has come that we have to crack down. We have to crack down on the moral standards which this nation has represented in its best times. Maybe not even its best times. That would even be better than anything we're getting right now. So we have a dedication, a proper dedication. A crime is being committed against the United States and by the United States, against the people of the United States and against the people of the world. We've got to stop the crime wave and go back to the standards we used to have, what we used to call honesty, what we used to call opportunity, what we used to call all these things that we liked, and to have neighborhoods you can live in. Well, for example, education that works for you, these kinds of things. It's silly business almost. It should be done. And we have to do that now. Because if we don't, the Queen's policy will reign. And the Queen's policy, how many people are we talking about on the planet now? 7 billion? The Queen is already pushing for less than 1 for the planet. How many people live in China presently? How many people live in India presently? Nations of over 1 billion population. And you're going to chop off more than 6 billion of the 7? And you are not worse than Hitler? Anybody who's doing these policies is worse than Hitler. And they're based on people who think like Hitler. Only they were more ambitious. So therefore, we now still have power. That is, the United States has power. Other nations have power. The British want to kill us? No, they're not going to kill us. We break their empire up. And let them have their kingdom, their little kingdom. Let them have other things. But they're not going to have that kind of power ever again. They're going to become normal nations, which do normal things that normal nations do in terms of what they understand their best interest is. And that's the only solution. And we now have on the table, before us, we have the opportunity with the coming meeting, this coming week, we have the opportunity to take steps which include Glass-Steagall, and through the establishment of Glass-Steagall, to restore this nation to its honor and to its people.
Well, on that note, one final question. As you just mentioned, and as I indicated in the beginning of this broadcast, this following week, we will have all 6 members of the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee in the Washington, D.C. area. We already have very significant meetings that have been set up with members of Congress, and we expect that this will have a very dramatic impact on the events of the next 6 or 7 days. Now, I want to ask a question on this theme, and it really continues the remarks that you made this past Monday in the discussion that we engaged in with the policy committee, where you said the responsibility lies with you, the people who are in this room. Very few people, but the very small handful of people who have succeeded in grasping the intellectual insight necessary to provide real leadership for the nation. And as you've repeatedly emphasized, leadership doesn't lie in the majority, but often leadership lies in the minority, in the small minority, often in the very small minority, who possess that intellectual insight and the courage to lead. So I would ask as a final question, as a prelude to the events of the coming week with the incoming policy committee, what is the challenge that we have to take up if a very small minority of us are going to succeed in leading this country?
Well, as you know, I am 90 years of age. And therefore, when you get to be 90 years of age, with my background and experience, you tend to say, well, this is not going to continue forever. And therefore, it's the time to focus on things which will have permanent value when I am gone. And that's the most important kind of mission you can have at my age and circumstances and so forth, and experience. I've been all over the world practically. I've been involved in everything. I've turned things upside down in various parts of the planet repeatedly. I'm good at that. And therefore now I have to take this wonderful good policy and ability to put it to work for my final run for making anything very big happen. And therefore I'm concerned to do this purpose. Now in the process, because of what I do and what my temperament is to do is essentially we have some young people. They're not that young anymore. We're going into the 30s department right now, at the best. So in any case, what these young people have, and they're on this particular committee, happen to be people who have exceptional capabilities, and they have enhanced those exceptional capabilities greatly during the past several years. So therefore, if I call them together as a team, and if you have heard, some of you may have heard the conversations that go on among these people, which I have practically every Monday, but for some years now. And they have not only been very bright, very capable from the beginning. They've been candidates for office, federal office, but they're also especially gifted. And when you put them together, which is what I understand very well, when you take some individual people who are very good, each good in terms of what their capabilities are, and then you give them several years of experience of working together for common actions to common ends, with a great variety of different kinds of things you do as these common ends. And when you assemble them together, as opposed to keeping them separate, so to speak, or being separate, you get an effect where they jam together, they lodge together, and they're capable of immediately responding at a highly rapid rate for great tasks. And what they have done, and the record exists in terms of the records of our organization. We've seen time and time again the kind of thing that we call leadership, real leadership. They have it. And they have this kind of leadership. So that when it comes to the question of ideas, they are very knowledgeable in many fields. They have all been demonstrated and tested to have this ability. So the idea was take the whole organization we have, put it into operation around the Congress. The Congress is the center point of reference for us. And pull these forces together and use that as a vehicle to draw together other people who may not always agree with each other, and to bring them together with a mission of the type I spoke of tonight. Let's take the people of the Congress, and look at the body of the Congress as containing people who, if they're pulled together in the right way, whatever party they come from, if they're pulled together in the right way on the question of forming a new sort of government now, which can be done, we can push the president into the places he belongs, but not big things above that. He should just be modestly the president for as long as he chooses to remain president. And he might not like our conditions, so therefore he might want to go away because he doesn't like what we do. All right. But anyway, if the Congress moves together to get the Glass-Steagall through, and to recognize that Glass-Steagall is the core, but only the core, of the reforms which have to be to save the nation. The purpose is to save the nation, to rebuild it, to get it out of the dirt and back into the pride it used to represent in these various states and areas I've indicated. That is what has to be done. I think it's possible to do that in this coming week. It's possible. The question is, make it happen.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. That will bring a conclusion to our broadcast for tonight. I'd also like to thank Leandra Bernstein for joining me in the studio. And I thank all of you for watching. That's the end of our broadcast. Good night.